You mentioned job interviews with artists as well. I'm kind of curious about that. Like, what are the kind of things that you look for when interviewing artists? And I know that's a bit of a generic question, but I'll also throw in what are some of the red flags that you tend to look for as well?
I think the red flags is maybe the easier question. Definitely when people are hopping around studios every 4 months, I'm like,
Mhm.
no, pass. I think when people have a reel of just enormous shots at huge studios, that's also a pass.
Get that 2% that you contributed to the shot usually.
Yeah, and you also probably just like used the setup that your supervisor did for
Yeah.
the blasts in the background. And that's not to disparage those shots. Like someone did really hard good work on them, but they probably aren't applying for a job. They probably still work at that large studio. It's funny, you see those same shots like on 17 different reels. Like that job finishes up and everyone's got like the same 4 shots on their reel, and you're like, and then the little ticker on the bottom, if you're lucky, if they've included it, is like foot dust or something. You're
Yep.
like, okay,
Background foot dust.
yeah, background sparks, and you're like, that's, I mean, cool. But I oftentimes in those cases will go to their Vimeo and look up their student reel, and that's the reel that I care about. Like I care about your talent and what you're doing. And I'd rather a minute and a half reel of your own stuff that looks good, or of stuff that you really owned and did all the pieces of, for sure. I always say to people that we can teach you to work at Ingenuity, but we can't teach taste. Like we can't teach you to make good decisions and know what nice things look like. We're always kind of prioritizing that in reels and in hires, for sure. Otherwise, you just burn through a ton of notes, kind of getting to something that's decent, and you don't spend your time making it great. There's a lot of people that are unfortunately very technically capable at the software and at driving the kind of train, but they just don't know any destinations. They're not really able to kind of like what is the composition of this shot? What would make the lighting here better? What's the, you're doing an explosion, but like, let's dirty it up and have it be asymmetrical and be weird, and it's like, technically you made a fine explosion, but it just doesn't look cool or good.
You said
And
that before.
those we'll get, but
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like someone can do a tutorial, and I feel like explosions are a good example of that. Where it's just like, if someone shows me a good explosion, that's great, but show me a good explosion that actually moves and hits the right beats and emphasizes scale and all, has character to it. Most people are going to roll their eyes. Like, you can't give character to an explode, whatever it is going to be, but it's those are the things that I think make everything. These days, I think it's pretty easy to make stuff look good by default. You can throw in some lights and some awesome textures from Megascans or somewhere, and you got something. But to actually take it to that extra step where it is something that people feel or really hits the scope that you've been given, like it's everything.
and it's a big hurdle. I mean, it's a big hurdle for still people that work here today. So I think it's an important thing to kind of keep in mind when I think people are looking at their own work. And that's another thing I always tell people when they first start. It's like, hey, when you're posting something, write what you have done and write what you're going to do still. Like, hey, this is a V1, like the grunge is a little much, I'm going to calm that down. Or the explosion, the trails feel like silly or too puffy or whatever. Like, letting people know that you're looking at your own stuff and being critical of it, I think, just is super important.
For me, especially if it's something that I'm really not blown away by, I'm always curious to get them to walk me through their shot, but more importantly, as you said, what they're intending to do, because it's sometimes things are just not ready yet, and that's fine. But as long as they're self-aware that, like, oh yeah, I need to tone down that ridiculousness over here and do more over here, then that kind of gives you reassurance, like, okay, cool, I can be hands off. But if someone's like, oh, I think it's done, that's when it's like, whoa, okay, we gotta
It's
go
such
back.
a red flag. I'm like, if you're halfway done and know it, that's fine. If you're halfway done and think you're done, like,
Mhm.
it's a problem for sure. I also always push people to find reference. I'm like, hey, this is feeling a little weird. Let's go find a reference that feels similar to what you're trying to do and match that. And then they'll, through that process, help themselves,